Hi, and welcome back to episode 5 of It's a Wonderful Life podcast. And this episode is titled, Are You Hungry Yet?
This episode is going to be dealing with a lot of the feeding issues that we've had with JJ. For many of you guys who know JJ or know our story, you know that JJ doesn't really eat anything by mouth. He's been pretty much tube fed for the longest. This episode is going to kind of chronicle, our journey with trying to get him to eat by mouth.
Boy, has it been fun.
So I guess our feeding issues really stem back to our time in the NICU. If you watched episode number 1 and number 2, we kind of briefly touched on it. We discussed how JJ was actually taking the bottle by mouth when he was in the NICU, but then eventually he started aspirating, and it was a silent aspiration. So, once the nurses found that out, then they pretty much cut him off completely of taking anything by mouth. And as we talked about in episode 1, a few weeks later, well, about a week later, then that's when they placed the G tube, which allowed us to go home. So after, we were home for that month, and we talked about episode 2 when we got readmitted to the PICU. You want to kind of discuss that a little bit?
After JJ was readmitted and having half of the small intestines removed, which making him a short gut SBS, short bowel syndrome kid. And obviously those effects, having a shorter intestinal tract, calls for more frequent stools.
Mm-hmm.
As you're eating the food, doesn't have the length for it to break down as we normally would with our intestines. So then he's not able to absorb a lot of nutrients and things from the food that he's eating, which, in hindsight helps him to grow. So then growing can be something challenging as well, putting on weight.
Yeah. So as Brittany mentioned, with his short gut syndrome or the short bowel syndrome, he had a lot of frequent stools, a lot more, when he was a lot younger. It would be about 4 or 5 times a day. And
we were told it would be like double that.
Yeah.
But he didn't.
He did a lot better. So about 4 or 5 times a day, and just really runny stools at times.
Yeah.
As his stomach was attempting to adapt to, having to put in that overtime, since it had, as Brittany talked about, less of a distance. So that kind of brings us to like our food journey. Now, as I mentioned, he was already silently aspirating. So before we can even attempt any food with him by mouth, he needed to undergo another swallow study, which I want to say he did that when he was, probably about 8 or 9 months old. So we had to take him up to Peoria.
He had a couple of those.
Yeah, the first one I think he failed, but before we were actually able to
fail, he was like, "Yep, this is we're failing with flying colors, JJ."
Yeah, before we were actually able to have him start eating food by mouth, he had to take that swallow study, and the last one he did pass. So they said he can eat something the consistency of honey, so it couldn't be too water, the water consistency, but he can eat. We got the green light to do baby food with him. So when we first started doing food with him, it did not go so well. So for JJ, he just really didn't like, any type of utensils. So that could have been, us trying to feed him by mouth with a spoon. That was a no-go. Of course, no forks or anything like that.
He didn't like anything like coming up to his mouth. So it was just, I guess, like the spoon. It was something that was like very intimidating for him, where he just was not happy at all.
So as we started like our food journey, it took a lot of creativity on our part, I would say, because we had to pretty much try to find ways to get him to eat, trying to overcome those barriers of him not wanting food first and foremost, because at the beginning he probably didn't really understand what the purpose of food was, since he had been tube fed, and that was a very consistent feeding that schedule that he was on. So one of the ways that we first got him to start eating was with the syringe. So we would use like the little syringe that we gave him his meds in, and what I would have to do first, he would have to be completely distracted, and I would take the syringe while he's looking at the TV, and then just press like 1 or 2 mLs into his mouth, and then it'll shoot into his mouth, and then he'll kind of try to eat it. But that was the first way that we were able to like consistently get him to start eating.
Yeah. So from the syringes, um, at this point, anybody who has a kid with similar situations or anything like this, you get really inventive. And whatever works, works. And you
Yeah.
just stick with it no matter how weird it looks or what somebody might say. You got to do what you got to do.
That brings up like a good point because he would not eat anything unless he was distracted. So oftentimes that was us having his favorite show, Morphle, on the TV. So he would watch Morphle, and then we would put him in his little exercise saucer thing and try to feed him.
And, he's like, hey, but watching the show, and then he would allow us to do it. So we just kept, sticking with that for a while. After that, then from the syringes, we tried pouches. So buying the actual like pouch, baby food you can buy from the store. Did that, and he tended to do pretty good. I think with the pouches, maybe I'm sure not in the beginning, probably because it's still, you don't really want to do it.
Yeah.
But he did pretty good with that.
Yeah, eventually he got to the point where, he would actually start kind of leaning forward a little bit, trying to, show some interest.
And that was like, whoo, gold
Yeah.
star, because it means he's interested. He's, yeah.
So,
Tough.
so I mean, it was, we eventually found a flavor that he liked. So he really liked his bananas.
Banana.
So I remember going to like the grocery store and buying like 20 jars of, bananas because, we always joke, whatever he decides that he wants to eat, we'll feed him that.
Still to this day, whenever you find out something, we will go out McDonald's. That's what you want? You have McDonald's every day.
So not every day, but that was one of the things. So he was really into the bananas. So we would find it in like the little baby pouches, or in the little jars. He would sometimes, just get really messy with it and, just start eating the bananas off of his hands.
And that was like him showing that he liked it, that he didn't mind it at all. So he's sucking this off his fingers, and we would put it on the tray and let his hands get in it, and he's just going to town on his hands and stuff. So we were like, we are on to something.
Yeah, so that was our go-to for a while, and then occasionally we'll try like different flavors with them. But with the feeding, there was always so many setbacks that would occur.
Story of our lives.
And when we would eventually get him on a consistent, maybe, and the consistency for us was getting him to eat 1 pouch of baby food a day, and that's 108 mLs. That's like a gulp of water to us.
Right.
But for him, that was a huge amount that he was able to intake. So one of the major setbacks would always occur, when he would get sick. And his colds would just kind of linger a little bit longer. Yeah. And during the times when he's sick, we couldn't feed him by mouth.
Because he had a lot going on. He already, when he was born, he was said to be, I guess, diagnosed with chronic lung. So anything that, when you have a cold, you have mucus, you have all those different things, those components. So when you have stuff that's trying to come up and you're trying to make him get food down and stuff, there's a lot of different things mixing together that, was just a lot. And for him to choke and gag and stuff on, so.
And he also had that Nissen surgery. I don't know if we talked about that. It's like a Nissen fundoplication or something like that, which also prevented him from coughing stuff up. So for JJ,
vomiting, all of that.
Anytime he gets sick, that mucus is just kind of like sitting there because there's no way for him to, get it out. So that was always a huge struggle for us, trying to make sure we're not choking him, essentially, like if we're trying to force him to eat some food. So by the time he would get over that cold, then it's like back to square one, slowly inching forward a little bit, trying to get him to, take that food
like
again.
Like he never had it before. Like, you got bananas. Like, get that away from me.
And then, eventually as he got a little bit older, one of the other major problems was he would have these coughing spells, and it would be every morning.
Like clockwork.
Yeah, like clockwork. He would wake himself up coughing, and then he'd be in there coughing for like 30 minutes, and there was really no way to get him to stop. We tried to give him water, things like that, but eventually he'll keep coughing, and then his routine was he's going to sneeze. Once he sneezed, then I know he's getting ready to
poop is coming next, probably.
Yep. So then we would try to get him on either like the potty or, at that time he was in diapers. So then that will cause him to stop. Still to this day, don't know why, that occurred.
And that brings along on just another level of stress because you're trying to get him, whether even for school. I remember they're trying to get him dressed for school, and if he's doing a lot of coughing, that means he's gonna have to like poop. So you want to have him poop before he leaves the house for go to school and not have an accident. It's like a domino effect with every single thing. Everything is like there's a cause and effect to every single thing.
Yeah, so we pretty much had to kind of learn, his patterns and the cues, I would call them. Now, during this time when he was having like those coughing spills, like he didn't want anything at all to do with food. So he wasn't trying to eat anything. No matter what we were trying, it just wasn't working. So at that point, that's when we started to reach out to like feeding therapists. We had originally had feeding therapy for him in Peoria, but had a really bad experience with that we'll probably talk on another episode.
Oh, I don't know if I remember that.
I took him to all those feeding therapy appointments. So we had a bad experience with that, but eventually we were recommended, the coordinators, I forgot which program it was that she was for, but she told us about feeding therapy in Springfield. They're supposed to be one of the top feeding clinics. So I scheduled the appointment with him up there. We took him, and this appointment was a little bit different because they take a holistic approach. So they don't just try to get the kid to eat. They want to figure out why he's not
why
eating.
Yes, and of course, you're okay. Like that makes sense. Let's start from square one, and let's work our way backwards.
So we ended up doing that, and she recommended us once to do another swallow study, but then also to go see an ear, nose, throat doctor. And
it seemed pointless at first.
It really did.
And we were driving to Springfield for these like 10-minute appointments. So I'm like, and then we're going in there and they're putting the scope, down his nose, and he's getting mad because we're having to hold him down. And then I think we went to a couple of those, and we were just kind of like, okay, this is gas. This is, time away from work or like whatever, like, and then just being with JJ in the hospital. And little do we know, it was great that we were, referred to them.
Really a godsend that we were referred to them because, the ear, nose, throat doctor, he recommended a prescription for us to try with JJ to see if we can get him to stop that coughing, because he realized that his adenoids were a little, enlarged.
Yeah.
So eventually the medication didn't really decrease the size of those adenoids. So the ear, nose, throat doctor wanted to go in and surgically remove them. So we scheduled that, and when he got his adenoids removed, I remember the doctor or the surgeon coming out, afterwards, and was like, these were the largest adenoids that I've, taken out.
This is his job, so he sees, I'm sure, a lot of adenoids.
Yeah.
And he said they were very enlarged for a little baby, for him to be as small as he was. And that was just unusual.
Yeah, and really the importance, I guess, of us going and having those adenoids removed was because that was probably the biggest barrier for JJ wanting to eat. Because with your adenoids being really enlarged, they said that it makes it really difficult for you to swallow because you don't have that, they talked about if it's like, your throat's regularly like this, but with your adenoids being enlarged, it really tightens it up, which makes it difficult for you, or discomforting for you to try to eat, which made total sense as to, why our feeding experience was always so stressful with JJ, with him fighting us during the feeds and things like that.
And I just thought about, we don't know how long those were enlarged. So, I'm sure it wasn't like an overnight thing. So this is something that was prolonged that maybe could have been rectified earlier on that could have helped with the feeding situations too. So it's like all those things you just don't know about, and you're literally just find them out along the way. Other people giving you references and things. Well, let's try and look at this that you have never heard of,
Yeah.
And who would have known? And JJ snored really bad.
He did.
He snored really bad, and those adenoids came out, and he was like a little.
Yeah. I remember Brittany was like, always would go in his room and kind of check to make sure he was breathing.
Yeah, breathing, might have taken pulse, or I was trying to move his leg or do something to make him move around or whatever. But that was different.
And also, when he removed his adenoids, they also put ear tubes in because, come to find out, JJ had a lot of fluid in his ears.
A whole lot. They said it was like the rubber cement in his ears. So he said all this time, and then we found out that led to speech. Which is that going to be another podcast?
That's going to be another episode.
That's another podcast. So these things that you don't know about are hindering these things that we're working so hard at. And these are just barriers, whether they're the huge barriers or just a small one. It's a barrier for what we're trying to do. And you don't know these things because they're just acting normal. And here he is, hearing everything like he's underwater, is what we're told the whole time, while he probably was not able to make out things.
Yeah,
So
and
that's
like
crazy.
specifically with the feeding, I know like when we found out like that his adenoids were enlarged, like I felt bad because I would get so frustrated with him for not wanting to eat, not understanding that the reason why he doesn't want to eat is because he's having problems.
There's a barrier there.
And he's not able to talk, so he's not able to communicate that to us. So I mean, I'm a huge advocate for seeing specialists, and because if we never got that referral, who knows how much
Those
longer
were
we would
two
have.
big things that happened with that. So
Yeah, I mean that could have went on for quite some time if we
Yeah.
didn't seek out medical help for that from professionals.
if you don't get anything else from this podcast, and you have similar situations, look into those things. It's not gonna hurt anything to look into those.
So even after he had that surgery, getting those adenoids removed and the ear tubes placed, he still wasn't wanting to eat. For a couple of weeks, I want to say, and I don't know if you remember that period, but I mean it was just a sense of frustration I know for me personally, just because even though he didn't want to eat, we had to continue to at least offer it every night, and it was really like a battle of wills. That's the only way to kind of put it, because you want him to eat even though he doesn't want to eat, so he's fighting against you. And as a parent, you're like, okay, you're gonna eat this food. So I just know that those were some rough times, but eventually we got him to eat, and it's all about incentives. So we just had to really find the right incentive. And I remember one time where I was trying to get him to eat. He didn't want to eat, but he wanted to play this game on the iPad. So
He loves the iPad,
yeah, so
especially Daddy's big iPad.
yeah, so I gave him the iPad for a little bit while he was sitting in his chair, and I let him play for a couple minutes, and then I took the iPad away, and then he's over here looking at me crazy, so I offered him the food, so he took a bite, and then I gave him the iPad back. So that positive reinforcement. And
Bribery.
eventually, yeah, that's the way that we got him to start eating again. You just really had to incentivize him, finding out exactly what it is that he wants, and kind of teasing him with it.
Yeah. Even though it's sad that it feels more like a task, he feels like you can tell he's eating because we're telling him to eat, and you want it to be him reaching for it again and him actually wanting to eat, that desire. But we're still not there yet, I would say, but.
Yeah, definitely not. He's come a long way
Yeah.
from, where he's been. We don't have that fight anymore.
Yeah.
Now the biggest thing is, he just wants to be up and around, moving around. So he doesn't want to just sit still and
Right.
eat. So that's a challenge. And I mean, he only likes smooth consistencies. So
We tried. You can tell all that.
You can go
We tried. Easter just passed, so we tried. I made some sweet potatoes, yams, whatever, and we put some into we have pouches that John found, this little machine, and you can actually put pouches in, and you can, instead of buying the pouches from the store, you can pre-fill these pouches with whatever you want to. So we use a little machine, has a little presser down thing, and
I'll put a picture up
okay, pretty cool, pretty simple.
just in
And-
case anybody needs to get one of those. Yeah.
True. So we said, hey, let's just try some in one of the pouches. So we got it in there. It was kind of tough. So because of the spout on it, when you're squeezing it and sweet potatoes are thicker, it kind of made it a little bit thick or whatever. So I'm like, well, they're mushy enough. And he got a little bit in his mouth. And oh my God. Like he was dying. I'm like, and it wasn't, I just immediately started cracking up. It was like John's like, JJ grabs a napkin and he's wiping his tongue off, trying to get it out of his mouth. And John's offering him water. It was hilarious, and I could not stop laughing because I knew he wasn't really choking and it didn't go back that far. But JJ is dramatic as well, so that'll make it any better. But yeah, it has to be baby food, smooth. It's where you eat something and it kind of just dissolves in your mouth and just kind of goes down. That was just not it, and he wasn't having it, so we didn't. And he went back to doing what he was doing like nothing ever happened. So hey, you can try something else another
Yeah, I
time.
mean, JJ has major texture issues, and we've kind of noticed that.
I have that too, but I'm sure that's not for
No,
me.
you don't have texture issues.
I
J,
do, but
no,
JJ's on a whole other level.
JJ has texture
Yeah, he's
issues.
on a whole other level.
Brittany just doesn't like certain things. But for him, as Brittany mentioned, it has to be a smooth consistency, or else he's not having it. So that eliminates a lot of, you know, other table foods that the typical toddler will be interested in.
I think it has a lot to do with him not knowing how to swallow as well. Like, even if I think if JJ begins to start eating more and he is interested in other things, he's going to have another swallow study because if it's not smooth enough like that, where he has to kind of break it down with his mouth himself, he can't swallow, and that's where the gagging is. It's he's choking. He's not really choking, but like he's choking because it's not going down.
Yeah.
So
So I mean, and we've tried things like the little puffs. Those are a no go.
yeah.
It just really has to be a smooth consistency. But he's definitely more interested in food now
Oh
than he's
yeah.
ever been,
He
even
used
though he doesn't
to.
want to eat.
Yeah, he used to not want anything to do. I mean, they would just say, put it on this tray, let him just touch it, and he ain't got to eat it. Oh my gosh, the look on his face of utter disgust is what he would look like get this away from me. He doesn't do that anymore, and so now, I mean, he'll come right up to you and put his fingers, which drives me nuts, put his fingers in your food, and I'm like, I have to eat that. Like, I want to eat that. You might not want to, but I do.
And he'll feed you. Today
Yep.
he was feeding me some M&Ms. So
Yep.
he'll take one by one and feed you.
He'll
He'll
watch
feed.
you eat. He gets excited, and you open up your mouth because he wants you to eat whatever it is. And then he started this thing when we would go out to restaurants. He started wanting the utensils, and it took me a while to figure out what he wanted. And one day he was trying to tell me, and I wasn't getting what he wanted, and he just kind of like looked at me, and I'm like, buddy, I don't know what it is you want. And I looked, and there was a fork there, so I grabbed the fork, and I gave it to him, and he's like, yeah, like that's what I wanted. I said, okay. So when we sit down to eat, especially at a restaurant, he sees everyone sitting down and eating. He wants a fork. So we tried to put some little food on the plate.
He's
He
still
messed
not
with it
eating
a
it.
little bit. He didn't really want to do that, but he wanted to stick the fork in your plate
And
and
feed
whoever's
you.
next to you. And, So, I mean, to me, that's a huge step for a kid who did not even want it on his hands and
Right.
would freak out and trying to wipe it off or whatever. So that's a huge step.
That he'll feed his little stuffed animals and his
Yes.
dinosaurs.
He loves play food. So we got him some play food, loves that. And he loves on like the YouTube videos on the iPad and stuff. He would watch little musicals or songs that had dancing ice cream and cheeseburgers
Donuts.
and fries. We had a song that we both knew all the words to that he would play all the time. So showing interest in that, he's watching these over and over again, alphabet things that have to do with vegetables, and he knows what they are too. So you see that peak in interest with food, which is in vast different variety of ways, is very interesting.
So hopefully, I mean, that just translates to him
I think it
eating
will
more.
one day. Who knows how
And,
long, but one day.
We both have, and I guess, with different parenting styles, we both have different thoughts on, the best way to get them to start eating. And, as I mentioned, like the eating has been, for me, it's the most, back then, was the most frustrating thing ever.
It is.
Like sitting down with them, trying to get them to eat for like that hour. It was, there's no,
It's like frustration, discouraging,
yeah.
all the above. And John kind of took that on more. He had, the techniques that he wanted to do and things like that he would do. But it was just something that I don't say I'll never because he's not interested in it either. But it's just hard for me like to do it, and he would get better results, I think, too. Maybe because he just has more patience or whatever it is. And then we know with JJ too is that he can be kind of lackadaisy when it comes to doing things, and where he can do more, but he chooses not to, or that he doesn't want to. So that can be frustrating in itself because he's not giving like 110%, or even 100%, and what he's doing. So that can be frustrating. But
I remember, like for me, like I used to, when I would sit there and feed him, I'd have to put on like a podcast, or I have to listen to something else to kind of take my mind off of it. or else I knew I would get frustrated in that
It's like a
moment.
whole mood changer.
It really is.
It's just like an attitude. It's kind of like just just let me be, and I'm more vocal, so I would ask John like, what's and he was like, it's just frustrating. He would like really be upset, like it's disappointing, is what it
Yeah.
is. So they kind of like I'm like, okay, so he is, he feeling something towards us too. But like you said, we have our different. I want to say parenting styles. We're pretty like the same on that as far as
I mean, we
somewhat.
both have the same goal of we want him to eat.
Right, but we have
But
different ways of thinking. Like you, what would be your?
so, I mean, for me, it's all about you got to keep doing repetition. So every single day I'm down there and I'll feed him. And, we have our routine. So I normally do majority of the food with him. And like I'm constantly searching for different things. So, when I found that little machine so we can start making our own food blends and not having to always go to the store and buy the pouches. So I'm constantly looking for newer ways to make that eating experience a little bit more easier on both JJ and I. And I feel like the only way that we're going to get him to, want to eat is to keep going at it and, trying different things.
And I somewhat feel the same way that I know that we have to keep doing it. We can't just like stop and just wait for the day, because we've seen that before. When he doesn't do it, then the interest lacks. So I understand that, I guess, but I guess mine is since JJ has been born, there has been a common theme with every hurdle that he's had to to overcome, and it's always been that JJ does everything in his own timing. This has been from being off the ventilator to crawling to walking to even mimicking things. It's just everything. We went to different specialists or whatever the case, and we're practicing night and day on these things, and he's just not getting it, not getting it. And then out of the blue one day, he just does it, and you're just like, and then you forget that you even, how long it took you to get there or how long you were working on it, because he just does it, and it's like, okay, on to the next thing. So this obviously has been one of those things that have been, very drawn out. But just from the beginning, like we talked about, him not being interested at all in food and not wanting to touch it, look at it, anything. And now him being very much interested. He does everything with food, but actually put it to his own mouth and eat it. So to me, that's just a vast difference where, that means something. So I think it will happen in his own timing. I'm praying to the good Lord that it is sooner than later, because
In order for him to get rid of the G tube, he has to take 90% of his food by mouth.
yeah, orally. So they will not remove that G tube until he shows that he can eat 90% of his, food orally. So that's a big thing. So it's kind of like, JJ, we're waiting on you, dude. So, and I think when he's able to speak a lot better too, I think that we can communicate better. Like he knows what the purpose of food is with us eating it, but I don't think he understands the purpose for himself,
Yeah.
or that it can be delightful. Like, JJ, there's things out there that taste good, and I think maybe if we're able to talk and he understands that and he can talk back to us, that would be, maybe he'd be, okay, like I will try that, or I'll try this. No, yes, I think it would, help things out a lot better too. So we just keep praying about it.
Yeah, it's
And
just
y'all will know, because everybody gonna know
yeah,
when it happens.
it's a process, and as Brittany mentioned, it's a very frustrating process because we know, the joys of food,
All right.
and
So,
he just
I
isn't.
got this pillow right here because my belly looking kind of big. I know the
So
joys of food.
and we just want to get him to that point, and more importantly, we just want to get rid of that G tube because
Yeah.
there's so many problems that come along with that. So like right now, that's what we're working on. We're still working on trying to find things that he's interested in, and now we're going to be switching towards a blended diet in the very near future.
It's kind of exciting to
Yeah, different
actually be able to do
flavors.
different, other foods and put in the consistency that he's able to, digest. Yeah.
And like I know for ourselves and for other parents out there who maybe have a kid with a G tube, whatever you think, like oh, maybe he'll eat at this. Yeah, we tried that.
Yeah, that's of course it's kind of annoying. You just got people, grandparent, or just anyone who just thinks, oh, well, have you tried Like, yeah,
Y'all need to just sit him down and make him. No, it's not gonna work like that.
It's really not. And like, you don't think what we've tried. I mean, it's a couple of things. Like, we bought. We neither one of us eats mashed potatoes, so I bought like a little packet. You know, I think you put it in the microwave. I'm like, I don't. We both don't know how to cook it, but it's supposed to be like ready. Add water. So we're gonna try something like that. Something that's more of a loose consistency too, but you know, that could be thicker like the sweet potatoes. You know, we don't know. So we're just open to trying. You know, whatever. But we do try all types of things. When we eat stuff, we swipe it on his lips, on his mouth, and different things to have him taste stuff. And he don't get too mad. You know, he kind of looking like, "What you doing?" But you know, he's doing a bunch of that. So I mean,
So maybe with this quarantine, one day we're just gonna sit down with like a bunch of different, flavors of food
see
and
what he
see
does.
if anything sticks
It's
with
best
him.
time now. We home, so we're reaching a lot of milestones too with us being home with this. This is the COVID-19 era. So we are reaching. There's been a lot of beneficial things of being home with him all day long. So
Yeah.
thankful for that. That time that you wouldn't normally get here.
So I mean, that's our food journey, and I mean that journey definitely isn't linear, as none of our journeys have been. There's been a lot of, exponential growth and then exponential decay, and it's really a back and forth. And as Brittany talked about, it's just a lot of frustration just on, that really stems a lot from like the discouragement that you get from, having a kid who just doesn't want to eat. And like you kind of feel bad for him because, even when he goes to school and, they have like their little snack time at the table and, at the old daycare, JJ would just be sitting there by himself. And, you never want your kid to kind of feel isolated, especially as they get a little bit older.
Yeah.
So that's something that we're going to keep working on, finding things for him to eat and
G-tube
get rid of
gots
that
to
G-tube.
go. Gots to go. Whatever we got to do, it's gots to go. It's been here too long.
So that's going to pretty much do it for this episode. And on the next episode, we'll be talking about speech issues. So
it's another one, y'all. Woo, they just keep coming, don't they?
Yeah, we're getting all these out the way.
Just keep coming.
So thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you
Lord
next
is
time.
good anyhow. Thank you guys for watching.